Manager Colonel Parker hung up the phone soaked in sweat. "Elvis, are you ready to destroy your career for this child?" he had asked. Elvis's response would change music history forever. "If I can't keep a promise I made to a child, then this career means nothing." At that moment, everyone realized he wasn't just a singer. Michael Thompson was not your typical 9-year-old boy. Living in the rough neighborhoods of South Memphis, he had learned to navigate a world that most children his age never had to face, a world where poverty, violence, and broken promises were daily realities that shaped every aspect of his young life. Michael's father had left when he was 4 years old, disappearing one night without explanation, and leaving behind only unpaid bills and a heartbroken family. His mother, Linda Thompson, worked 3 different jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads in the small, rundown apartment they called home. Linda cleaned office buildings downtown from midnight until 6 in the morning, worked at a local diner during the lunch rush, and spent her evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store. Despite her exhausting schedule, she tried desperately to provide Michael with as much stability and love as possible, though she was often too tired to give him the attention she knew he needed. Michael had become accustomed to spending long hours alone, entertaining himself with a small transistor radio that had belonged to his grandmother. The radio was his window to a larger world, and through its crackling speakers he discovered the music that would become his sanctuary, Elvis Presley. There was something about Elvis's voice that spoke directly to Michael's young heart. When Elvis sang about loneliness in Heartbreak Hotel, Michael understood that feeling with a depth that seemed impossible for someone so young. When Elvis performed upbeat songs like Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock, Michael would dance around their small apartment, imagining himself on stage performing for thousands of adoring fans. But it wasn't just the music that captivated Michael, it was the story behind Elvis himself. Michael had learned from radio DJs and magazine articles that Elvis had also grown up poor in Mississippi, that he had faced challenges and hardships similar to those Michael experienced daily. This connection made Elvis feel less like a distant celebrity and more like someone who understood what it meant to struggle and dream of something better. Michael's bedroom walls were covered with pictures of Elvis that he had carefully cut out from magazines he found discarded at the grocery store where his mother worked. His most prized possession was a worn Elvis record that a neighbor had given him, which he played so frequently that it had developed scratches that made Elvis's voice sound distant and magical. The turning point in Michael's young life came during the summer of 1975, when his mother surprised him with news that seemed too good to be true. Through a charity organization at her church, Linda had managed to secure 2 tickets to see Elvis perform at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. "Are you serious, Mama?" Michael had asked, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the actual tickets in his mother's hands. "I'm serious, baby," Linda replied, fighting back tears of both joy and exhaustion. "I know how much Elvis means to you, and I wanted to give you something special. We're going to see him perform live." The tickets represented far more than their monetary value. They were Linda's way of giving her son a moment of pure magic in a life that had contained too much struggle and uncertainty. She had worked extra shifts for months to afford them, often pushing herself to the point of collapse, but seeing the happiness on Michael's face made every sacrifice worthwhile. The weeks leading up to the concert were filled with anticipation that transformed Michael's entire outlook on life. He talked about nothing else, planned what he would wear, and practiced singing Elvis songs in preparation for what he was certain would be the most important night of his life. But 3 days before the scheduled concert, their world collapsed once again. Linda was injured in an accident at the office building where she worked her overnight cleaning job. A heavy cart had fallen on her leg, fracturing her ankle and leaving her unable to walk without crutches. More devastating than her physical injury was the financial reality it created. Linda couldn't work while she recovered, which meant no income for several weeks. The medical bills from her emergency room visit consumed what little savings she had managed to accumulate, and suddenly, the Elvis concert tickets represented money they desperately needed for basic survival. "I'm so sorry, Michael," Linda said through her tears, as she explained that they would have to sell the tickets to help pay for groceries and rent. "I know how much you were looking forward to this, but we need the money to eat." Michael, despite his young age, understood the gravity of their situation. He had learned early in life that dreams often had to be sacrificed for survival, and he tried to be brave for his mother's sake. "It's okay, Mama," he said, though his own eyes were filled with tears. "Maybe we can see Elvis another time." But Linda could see the heartbreak in her son's eyes, and it cut her deeper than any physical injury she had sustained. That evening, as Michael lay in bed listening to his crackling radio and trying not to cry, Linda made a decision that would change their lives forever. She had heard that Elvis was known for his generosity and his connection with fans, especially children. She decided to write him a letter explaining their situation and asking if there might be any way for Michael to meet his idol, even if they couldn't attend the concert. Linda spent hours crafting the letter, trying to find words that would convey Michael's genuine love for Elvis's music without sounding like she was begging for charity. She explained Michael's difficult circumstances, his devotion to Elvis's music, and how the upcoming concert had represented the first thing he had looked forward to in years. "Dear Mr. Presley," she wrote, "my son Michael is your biggest fan. He listens to your music every day and dreams of meeting you someday. We had tickets to your concert, but I was injured, and we need to sell them to pay our bills. I know you probably get thousands of letters like this, but if there's any way Michael could just shake your hand or get a quick picture, it would mean the world to him." Linda mailed the letter to Elvis's management company, knowing that the chances of it reaching Elvis himself were virtually non-existent, but she felt she had to try, even if it meant facing another disappointment. What Linda didn't know was that Elvis had recently implemented a new policy with his staff regarding fan mail. Disturbed by stories of people in genuine need whose letters never reached him, Elvis had instructed his team to forward any correspondence that involved children in difficult circumstances directly to his personal attention. Michael's story, as told through his mother's heartfelt letter, reached Elvis on a Tuesday afternoon as he was preparing for his upcoming Memphis concerts. Something about the letter, perhaps the mother's obvious love for her son, or the fact that Michael's story reminded Elvis of his own childhood struggles, prompted him to take immediate action. Elvis called his security chief, Red West, and asked him to investigate the Thompson family's situation. "I want to know if this is legitimate," Elvis said, "and if it is, I want to help this kid." Red's investigation confirmed everything Linda had written in her letter. The Thompsons were indeed struggling financially. Linda had been injured at work, and Michael was exactly the kind of devoted young fan that Elvis felt compelled to support. But when Elvis decided to invite Michael to the concert as his personal guest, he discovered that the situation was more complicated than he had initially understood. The neighborhood where Michael lived was controlled by a violent gang that had been extorting money from local businesses and threatening anyone who tried to bring positive attention to the area. The gang's leader, a man named Vince Castellano, had made it clear that he didn't want any celebrities or media attention in his territory. He saw Elvis's planned visit as a threat to his control and issued a direct warning: if Elvis showed up in South Memphis, there would be consequences. When Colonel Parker learned about the threats against Elvis, he was furious and terrified. The safety risks were real and significant, and Parker couldn't understand why Elvis would jeopardize his career and possibly his life for one child. "Elvis, this is insane," Parker had argued during a heated meeting in Elvis's Graceland office. "This gang leader is serious. If you go into that neighborhood, you could be putting yourself and everyone around you in danger. Is meeting one kid really worth risking everything we've built?" But Elvis had already made his decision, and nothing Parker said could change his mind. He had given Michael a promise, and he intended to keep it regardless of the consequences. "Colonel," Elvis replied with the calm determination that those close to him recognized as absolute, "I grew up poor too. I know what it's like to have nothing to look forward to except the hope that maybe someday something magical might happen. If I can be that magic for this kid, then that's what I'm going to do." Parker continued to argue, bringing in lawyers and security experts who all advised against the visit. They explained that Elvis's insurance wouldn't cover him if he deliberately entered a dangerous situation, that his upcoming concert contracts could be voided if he was injured, and that the negative publicity could damage his reputation if the situation went wrong.
"You're talking about potentially destroying your career over one child," Parker had said in what would become their final conversation on the subject.
Elvis's response became one of the most quoted statements of his career: "If I can't keep a promise I made to a child, then this career means nothing." Elvis began planning Michael's visit with the same attention to detail he brought to his major concerts. He arranged for a small security team, planned a route through the neighborhood that would minimize exposure to danger, and coordinated with local police to ensure that they could respond quickly if needed. But Elvis also did something that surprised everyone around him. He decided to make the visit about more than just Michael. He learned that many children in the neighborhood had never had positive role models or opportunities to dream beyond their immediate circumstances. Elvis saw this as an opportunity to bring hope to an entire community, not just one child. On the day of the visit, Elvis arrived in South Memphis, driving his own car rather than the limousine that Vince Castellano would recognize as belonging to a celebrity. He was accompanied by only 2 security personnel, and they had planned to keep the visit quiet and brief. But word of Elvis's presence spread quickly through the neighborhood, and within minutes, dozens of children and their families had gathered around the Thompson apartment building. What was supposed to be a private meeting between Elvis and Michael turned into an impromptu community event. Michael's reaction when he opened his apartment door and saw Elvis Presley standing in the hallway was everything that Elvis had hoped for and more. The boy's face lit up with pure joy and disbelief, and for a moment he was too overwhelmed to speak. "Are you Michael?" Elvis asked with his characteristic warm smile. "Yes, sir," Michael managed to whisper. "Well, Michael, I'm Elvis, and I believe I owe you a concert." What followed was an afternoon that no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. Elvis spent over 3 hours in the Thompsons' small apartment, talking with Michael about music, life, and dreams. He played Michael's scratched Elvis record on their old turntable and was moved by how much the boy had treasured something so worn and damaged. "This record sounds like it's been loved," Elvis said, as he listened to his own voice crackling through the speakers. "I play it every day," Michael admitted. "It's my favorite thing in the whole world." Elvis then did something that would become the most treasured moment of Michael's life. He pulled out his guitar and performed a private concert in the Thompsons' living room. He sang "Love Me Tender," "Can't Help Falling in Love," and several gospel songs that filled the small space with magic. But the visit took on even greater significance when Vince Castellano and several of his gang members appeared outside the apartment building. The confrontation that Elvis had been warned about was about to become reality. Elvis, demonstrating the courage that had made him a legend, walked outside to face Castellano directly. The 2 men stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by curious neighbors and nervous security personnel. "You were told not to come here," Castellano said menacingly. "I made a promise to a child," Elvis replied calmly. "I'm not leaving until I've kept that promise." What happened next surprised everyone present. Instead of escalating the conflict, Elvis began talking to Castellano about his own childhood, about growing up poor and angry, and about how music had given him a way to channel his frustration into something positive. "I'm not here to threaten your territory or cause problems," Elvis explained. "I'm here because a little boy needed someone to believe in him. Maybe some of these other kids need that too." The conversation between Elvis and Castellano lasted nearly an hour, and by the end, something had shifted. Castellano, who had built his reputation on intimidation and violence, found himself moved by Elvis's genuine commitment to helping children in the neighborhood. "You can stay," Castellano finally said, "but if you're going to help these kids, you better mean it. Don't come here and make promises you won't keep." Elvis's response cemented his commitment. "I'll be back every month until these kids have what they need to believe in their futures." And Elvis kept that promise with a dedication and consistency that exceeded everyone's expectations. Every month for the next 2 years, until his death in 1977, Elvis made the journey to South Memphis, arriving not with fanfare or media attention, but quietly and purposefully, ready to work with the community he had come to love. These monthly visits became legendary in the neighborhood, not because of their celebrity aspect, but because of their genuine impact on the daily lives of children and families. Elvis would typically arrive on a Saturday morning, spending the entire day visiting with families, participating in community meetings, and working directly with children on educational and artistic projects. During his second visit, Elvis met Carmen Martinez, a 7-year-old girl whose mother worked double shifts at a laundromat to support 3 children. Carmen had shown remarkable artistic talent but had no access to art supplies or instruction. Elvis not only provided materials but arranged for Carmen to receive weekly art lessons from a professional instructor at a downtown gallery. Carmen's artistic development became one of Elvis's favorite success stories to share during his visits. By the time she reached high school, Carmen had won several regional art competitions and had received a full scholarship to attend art school. Her paintings, many of which depicted scenes from her neighborhood and the community center, eventually hung in galleries throughout Memphis and beyond. Elvis Elvis saw something in me that I didn't even know was there, Carmen later said. He didn't just give me art supplies, he gave me permission to dream bigger than I thought was possible. On his third visit, Elvis encountered the Rodriguez family, whose 14-year-old son Luis was struggling with anger management issues that had led to several suspensions from school. Rather than simply offering advice, Elvis spent individual time with Luis during each subsequent visit, sharing his own experiences with frustration and teaching him to channel negative emotions through music and physical exercise. Luis eventually became one of the community center's most effective peer mentors, helping other young people navigate the challenges of adolescence in a difficult environment. His transformation from an angry, isolated teenager to a confident community leader inspired other families to believe that change was possible even in the most challenging circumstances. The relationship between Elvis and Vince Castellano also continued to evolve during these monthly visits. What had begun as a tense confrontation gradually developed into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the neighborhood's children. Castellano began accompanying Elvis on his visits to individual families, using his knowledge of the community to help identify children and families who could benefit most from additional support. His presence also provided a form of protection for Elvis, ensuring that their work could continue without interference from other criminal elements in the area. Vince became my partner in this work, Elvis later told a close friend. He knows these families better than anyone, and they trust him. When he tells a kid that education matters, they listen in a way they might not listen to an outsider like me. The transformation in Castellano's life accelerated during this period. With Elvis's encouragement and support, he began taking night classes to complete his high school education, something he had abandoned during his teenage years when survival had become his primary focus. The sight of the neighborhood's former gang leader studying algebra and English composition at the community center became a powerful symbol for other adults who had given up on their own educational goals. Several parents began joining Castellano in adult education classes, creating a culture of learning that extended throughout the community. During his 8th visit, Elvis witnessed a breakthrough moment that would reshape his understanding of community development work. A group of neighborhood children had organized a talent show to raise money for new playground equipment, and Elvis was invited to serve as one of the judges. The performances that evening ranged from singing and dancing to poetry and comedy, but what struck Elvis most profoundly was the confidence and creativity displayed by children who had previously been shy and withdrawn. These were the same kids he had met months earlier, who had seemed defeated by their circumstances and skeptical about their futures. Watching those children perform that night, Elvis later reflected, "I realized that our work wasn't just about providing services or opportunities. It was about helping kids discover that they had value, that their voices mattered, that they deserved to be seen and heard and celebrated." The success of that talent show led to the establishment of regular cultural events at the community center, including monthly open mic nights, art exhibitions featuring work by local children, and seasonal festivals that brought together families from throughout the neighborhood. These events served multiple purposes beyond entertainment. They provided opportunities for children to practice public speaking and performance skills. They created occasions for families to gather and strengthen community bonds, and they demonstrated to the broader Memphis community that South Memphis was home to talented, creative people who deserved recognition and support. Local media began covering these events, but always with Elvis's insistence that the focus remain on the children and families rather than on his own involvement. This approach helped ensure that the community center and its programs would be sustainable beyond his personal involvement. By his 15th visit, Elvis had begun incorporating other musicians and entertainers into the community work. He invited fellow performers to join him for visits, exposing children to diverse artistic influences and providing additional role models for young people interested in creative careers. Johnny Cash visited the center on several occasions, teaching children about country music and storytelling. Aretha Franklin conducted a gospel singing workshop that became one of the center's most popular programs. B.B. King provided guitar lessons and talked with teenagers about the discipline and dedication required to succeed in the music industry. These celebrity visits were carefully planned to maximize their educational and inspirational impact rather than their publicity value. Each visiting artist was asked to prepare interactive workshops or presentations that would engage children children actively, rather than simply entertaining them passively. The educational component of the community center's programming expanded significantly during this period, with Elvis personally funding computers, science equipment, and library materials that were not available in the under-resourced local schools. Mrs. Washington, a retired teacher who had volunteered to coordinate the center's tutoring programs, worked with Elvis to develop an after-school curriculum that combined academic support with creative expression and life skills training. Elvis understood that these children needed more than just help with homework. Mrs. Washington explained, they needed to develop confidence, critical thinking skills, and the ability to envision and work toward long-term goals. Our programs were designed to address all of those needs simultaneously. The impact of this comprehensive approach became evident in standardized test scores and graduation rates at the local schools. Within 3 years of the center's opening, reading and mathematics scores had improved by an average of 2 grade levels among participating students, and the high school dropout rate had declined by nearly 60%. But perhaps more importantly, the center had created a culture of academic achievement and mutual support that extended throughout the neighborhood. Older students regularly tutored younger ones, parents became more involved in their children's education, and families began expecting and planning for their children to pursue post-secondary education or training. Michael Thompson's progress continued to exemplify the center's potential impact. By his junior year of high school, he was taking advanced placement courses in mathematics and music theory, had been accepted into the school's elite jazz ensemble, and was being recruited by several colleges for both academic and musical scholarships. But Michael's success was not just individual, it was communal. He spent significant time at the center mentoring younger children, teaching piano lessons, and sharing his story as an example of what was possible with hard work and community support. Michael became a walking advertisement for our programs, Mrs. Washington observed. When other children saw how he had transformed from a struggling student to a confident young leader, it helped them believe that they could achieve similar success. The ripple effects of the center's work extended far beyond the immediate neighborhood. Other communities throughout Memphis began requesting assistance in developing similar programs, and Elvis found himself serving as an informal consultant for community development initiatives throughout the Mid-South. The success of the South Memphis model led to the establishment of satellite programs in rural areas where poverty and limited opportunities created challenges similar to those faced by urban children. Elvis funded transportation to bring children from these rural communities to Memphis for special workshops and cultural events, ensuring that geographic isolation would not prevent them from accessing enriching experiences. By his 20th monthly visit, Elvis had begun planning for the long-term sustainability of the programs he had helped create. Working with community leaders and professional development specialists, he established an endowment fund that would ensure the center's operations could continue beyond his personal involvement. The fund was designed not just to cover operating expenses, but to provide for programmatic expansion and innovation, ensuring that the center could adapt to changing community needs and take advantage of new opportunities for serving children and families. Elvis also worked with local colleges and universities to create internship and service learning opportunities that would bring additional resources and energy to the center's programs while providing valuable experience for students pursuing careers in education, social work, and community development. The relationship between Elvis and the South Memphis community had evolved from celebrity charity to genuine partnership, with community members taking increasing leadership roles in planning and implementing programs, while Elvis provided financial support and used his platform to advocate for broader policy changes that would benefit similar communities. This evolution reflected Elvis's growing understanding of effective community development practices and his commitment to ensuring that his involvement would strengthen rather than replace local leadership capacity. When Elvis made his final visit to the community center in June 1977, just 2 months before his death, he participated in a graduation ceremony for the first group of high school students who had been involved with the center since its early days. Michael Thompson was the valedictorian of this class, and his graduation speech focused on the power of adults who keep their promises to children and the importance of using success to create opportunities for others. 2 years ago, Elvis Presley made a promise to a 9-year-old boy, Michael said during his speech. That promise didn't just change my life, it changed our entire community. But the most important thing Elvis taught us is that we all have the power to make and keep promises to each other, and that those promises are what build strong communities and bright futures. Elvis's response to Michael's speech became one of his final public statements about community work and his philosophy of service. "Michael," he said, "you and your classmates have taught me more than I ever taught you. You've shown me that when adults believe in children and follow through on their commitments, young people don't just succeed individually, they lift up everyone around them." The legacy of Elvis's promise to Michael Thompson and his commitment to the South Memphis community continued long after his death. The community center remained active and continued to expand its programming, serving as a model for similar initiatives throughout the country. Michael Thompson went on to attend college on a full scholarship, eventually earning a master's degree in education and returning to Memphis to work in the public school system. His career was dedicated to replicating the kind of supportive, comprehensive programming that had transformed his own life. Vince Castellano completed his high school education and went on to earn a degree in social work, eventually becoming the executive director of the Elvis Presley Community Center. His transformation from gang leader to community leader became a powerful example of how people can change their lives when provided with support, opportunity, and belief in their potential. The other children and families who had benefited from Elvis's monthly visits and the center's programs went on to achieve successes that exceeded everyone's expectations. College graduation rates among center participants were more than double the national average for children from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, and many went on to careers in education, social services, and community development, continuing the cycle of service that Elvis had begun. The story of Elvis's promise to Michael Thompson became a foundational narrative for discussions about celebrity responsibility, community development, and the power of individual commitment to create lasting social change. It demonstrated that authentic community engagement required more than financial contributions. It demanded personal investment, consistent presence, and willingness to learn from and be changed by the communities being served. Educational programs throughout the country began incorporating the story into character development curricula, teaching students about the importance of keeping promises, standing up for what's right, and using whatever privileges or resources they possessed to help others achieve their potential. Social work and community development programs used Elvis's approach as a case study in effective practice, emphasizing the importance of listening to community voices, building genuine relationships, and maintaining long-term commitments rather than seeking quick fixes or superficial solutions. The Elvis Presley Foundation, established after his death, continued to support community-based youth development programs throughout the region, always following the principles that Elvis had learned during his work in South Memphis. Listen first, build relationships, make authentic commitments, and measure success by the achievements of the people being served rather than by external recognition or praise. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Elvis's decision to risk his career for a promise to a child was the lesson it taught about priorities and values in a world that often seemed to prioritize wealth and fame over human connection and service to others. Michael Thompson's children grew up hearing the story of how Elvis Presley had kept a promise to their father, and how that promise had shaped not just their father's life but the lives of thousands of people throughout their community. They learned that heroes were not just characters in movies or comic books, but real people who chose to do the right thing even when it was difficult, dangerous, or costly. Grandpa Elvis, as Michael's children called him, became a family legend, not because of his fame or commercial success, but because he had demonstrated that promises to children were sacred commitments that should be honored regardless of the personal consequences. The community center continued to display the original letter that Linda Thompson had written to Elvis, along with photographs from his monthly visits and testimonials from the hundreds of children and families whose lives had been changed by his commitment to keeping a simple promise to a 9-year-old boy. These displays served as daily reminders to everyone who entered the building that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they made authentic commitments to children and followed through on those commitments with consistency, creativity, and love. In the end, Elvis's willingness to risk his career for a promise to Michael Thompson proved that true greatness is not measured by commercial success or popular acclaim, but by the courage to prioritize what matters most, the welfare and potential of children, even when doing so requires significant significant personal sacrifice. The story became a timeless reminder that the most important promises are often the ones made to children, that keeping those promises requires ongoing commitment rather than single acts of charity, and that when adults honor their commitments to young people, the positive effects ripple outward through families, communities, and generations in ways that far exceed what anyone could have imagined when the original promise was made. Elvis's willingness to risk his career for a promise to a child became a defining moment in his legacy. It demonstrated that his fame and success had not disconnected him from his understanding of what it meant to struggle, to hope, and to need someone to believe in you. The story spread throughout the music industry and inspired other entertainers to consider how they might use their platforms to make meaningful differences in individual lives. The idea that celebrity status came with responsibilities to help those in need became more widely accepted, and many artists began incorporating community service into their career planning. Colonel Parker, who had been so opposed to Elvis's decision to visit Michael, later admitted that it had been one of the most important things Elvis had ever done. The positive publicity from Elvis's community work actually enhanced his reputation and attracted new fans who admired his character as much as his music. Elvis taught me something that day, Parker reflected years later. Sometimes the most important business decision is the one that isn't about business at all. Sometimes you have to choose what's right over what's profitable. The community center that Elvis established in South Memphis continued operating for decades after his death, serving thousands of children and families. A plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to the memory of Elvis Presley, who proved that keeping promises to children is the most important work any adult can do." Michael Thompson went on to become a successful music teacher and community organizer, dedicating his career to providing opportunities for children in underserved communities. He often told his students about the day Elvis Presley risked everything to keep a promise to a 9-year-old boy, and how that moment had shaped his understanding of what it meant to be trustworthy and committed to others. "Elvis didn't just give me a concert that day," Michael would say. "He gave me a lesson about integrity, about the importance of keeping your word even when it's difficult or dangerous. That lesson has guided every important decision I've made in my life." The impact of Elvis's decision extended far beyond Michael and his neighborhood. Social workers and child advocates began using Elvis's story as an example of how adults could make meaningful differences in children's lives through simple acts of commitment and follow-through. Educational programs started incorporating the story into character development curricula, teaching students about the importance of keeping promises and standing up for what's right, even when it's challenging. When Elvis died in 1977, Michael was among the thousands of mourners who gathered at Graceland to pay their respects. But for Michael, the grief was personal and profound. He had lost not just a musical idol, but a mentor who had fundamentally shaped his understanding of what it meant to be a person of integrity. At Elvis's funeral, Michael carried a simple sign that read, "Thank you for keeping your promise." The photograph of Michael holding that sign became one of the most powerful images associated with Elvis's death, representing the personal connections he had made with fans throughout his career. Years later, when biographers and music historians examined Elvis's life and legacy, many pointed to his visit to Michael Thompson as representing the best of what Elvis stood for, not just as an entertainer, but as a human being who understood that fame and success were meaningless unless they were used to help others. The story became a touchstone for discussions about celebrity responsibility, the importance of mentorship, and the power of adults to shape children's futures through simple acts of caring and commitment. Michael Thompson's own children grew up hearing the story of how Elvis Presley had risked his career to keep a promise to their father. They learned that heroes weren't just people in movies or comic books, but real people who chose to do the right thing, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Grandpa Elvis, as Michael's children called him, became a family legend, not because of his fame or success, but because he had shown their father that promises mattered, that adults could be trusted, and that dreams were worth fighting for. The community center that Elvis established eventually expanded into a network of programs serving children throughout Memphis and the Mid-South. The Elvis Presley Foundation, established after his death, continued his work of providing educational opportunities and support for children in need. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Elvis's decision to risk his career for a promise to a child was the lesson it taught about priorities and values. In a world where celebrity status often seemed to insulate people people from the struggles of ordinary life. Elvis had demonstrated that fame could be used as a tool for service rather than just self-promotion. Michael Thompson's story became a reminder that sometimes the most important promises are the ones we make to children, and that keeping those promises regardless of the cost is what separates heroes from mere celebrities. In the end, Elvis's willingness to risk his career for a 9-year-old boy proved that true greatness isn't measured by commercial success or popular acclaim, but by the courage to do what's right when it matters most. It showed that the most powerful thing any of us can do is to see potential in a child and commit ourselves to nurturing that potential, whatever the consequences might be. The legacy of that promise lived on in every child who benefited from the programs Elvis established, in every adult who learned that promises should be kept regardless of the cost, and in the understanding that sometimes the most important performance happens not on stage, but in the quiet moments when we choose to honor our commitments to those who need us most.